folks, welcome and thank you for tuning in. This is Henrik. We'll start with a clip.
Many individuals and groups, particularly Jewish and Zionist organizations, would prefer that the world remains ignorant of these dissenting voices and have coined the terms Holocaust denial and revisionism in an attempt to silence them. They have managed to persuade the governments of many otherwise civilized countries to criminalize any adverse discussions of the details of the Holocaust on pain of imprisonment or a heavy fine, on the basis that to question any facet of the official Holocaust story somehow constitutes an incitement to racial hatred or something equally nonsensical. I find it offensive beyond belief that a combination of Jews and Zionists has been able to persuade so many governments that the Holocaust is the single event in history on which open discussion will not be permitted. It cannot possibly be incitement to racial or religious hatred to point out that something that is said to have happened over 60 years ago may not have happened in exactly the way it was reported to have happened at that time. The world had not even begun to recover from the unbelievable suffering of hundreds of millions of people, not only Jews, and the deaths of about 60 million human beings for reasons and causes which may never be fully understood. Whatever the reason, such a ban is certainly not in line with the Declaration of Human Rights, conferring, as it does, a special privilege on one particular group of people over all others. Making certain details of the Holocaust sacrosanct stirs deep suspicions in my mind, because it could mean that there are those who wish to conceal certain facts which may not reflect well on themselves or on those who played an active part in the deaths and suffering of Jews and Gentiles alike before, during, and immediately after that terrible war. I cannot think of any other reason why genuine historical research should be characterized as being offensive to the memories of those who died, or as an incitement to racial or religious hatred. And I often wonder why so many of the people who seem to claim a special privilege of remembrance for their own suffering, or for that of their forebears and co-religionists, are now persecuting and killing others in a land that Zionism has been insisting that they were predestined to settle in since before the beginning of the 20th century. It is the utter single-mindedness of those who hunt down and persecute so-called Holocaust deniers and revisionists that I object to. Millions of people, not only Jews, suffered and died horrible deaths on battlefields, on the high seas, and in fire-bombed cities during a conflict that may never have happened, had international Jewry not declared economic war on Germany. The front page of the London Daily Express of March 24, 1933, says it all. Judea declares war on Germany. Jews of all the world unite. Boycott of German goods. Mass demonstrations. One of the leaders of the movement, Samuel Untermyer, ignored pleas from Jews who lived in Germany not to go ahead with the boycott, for obvious reasons, but on August 6, 1933, he said this on WABC New York. Each of you, Jew and Gentile alike, who has not already enlisted in this sacred war, should do so now and here. It is not sufficient that you should buy no goods made in Germany, you must refuse to deal with any merchant or shopkeeper who sells any German-made goods or who patronizes German ships or shipping. We will undermine the Hitler regime and bring the German people to their senses by destroying their export trade on which their very existence depends. When looking at historical events and their far-reaching consequences, it is essential to try and understand the context in which they took place. At the time of the Jewish declaration of economic war, the political picture in Germany was extremely volatile. In certain circles, it has been largely forgotten, perhaps conveniently, that Jews formed a substantial proportion of the Bolshevik elite at the birth of the Soviet Union, little more than a decade earlier, and that many German Jews supported communism during Hitler's rise to power. Those who remember, or who have learned about the McCarthy era in the United States, should be able to understand the fears of Germans in the early 1930s to what many of them saw as the real threat of a Jewish-led communist takeover. Add to that international juries' openly promoted aim to destroy its economy, how can it not be understood that a rise of anti-Jewish sentiment in Germany was inevitable and far more rational than it is characterized today?
This is not a Jewish meeting. This is the conscience of America making itself felt.
In that speech, Rabbi Stephen Wise, claiming to speak for all Americans, turned the Jews of Germany into the enemy inside the gates. Make no mistake, this declaration of war was a Jewish initiative and the reason why the Jews of Europe were later herded into concentration camps. Today, with no mention of the context, the not unreasonable fears of the Germans are denigrated as being anti-Semitic, pure and simple. A later circumstance with similar overtones was the fear generated in the United States by the attack on Pearl Harbor, which led to the rounding up and internment of all people of Japanese descent. As a result of their confinement for the duration, many of them lost their homes, jobs, businesses, friends, and savings, and many of them died in those prison camps. But for the imprisoned Japanese, there was nothing similar to the Zionist pact with Hitler, known as the Transfer Agreement, which allowed German Jews to head for the safe haven of Palestine. So what is it about the Holocaust story that needs so much protection?
Germans planned and perpetrated the Holocaust. We must confront this fact and accept our own guilt and the responsibility that results from it.
Hang on, some Germans may have done what you say, but not the wonderful German girl that I met in London in 1958. She would have been 8 years old when the war ended. This apparently self-hating German justice minister is claiming that children must bear the guilt for the sins of their fathers. That is a monstrous concept from the book of Exodus, and in my book, far closer to hate speech than many of the criticisms one reads about Zionist excesses in Gaza, for example. Her contribution to a podcast series called Voices of Anti-Semitism ended with this incitement to disregard Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights.
It remains important that we do not leave any room for Holocaust deniers.
How many times does it need to be said? Questioning certain details about the Holocaust is not denying it happened, but in the interests of balance, it is just as important that we do not leave room for Holocaust liars. The grotesque power without responsibility of the Anti-Defamation League under Abe Foxman, whose accusations of Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism, hatred, prejudice, bigotry and discrimination echo around the so-called free world, resulting in loss of jobs, fines and prison sentences, allows the lies told about certain details of the Holocaust to remain on countless internet websites with impunity. There is a teacher's guide to the Holocaust, which includes these chilling statements. 1. An entire state bureaucracy was mobilized solely for the purpose of annihilating Jews. 2. German technological expertise was harnessed to make the mass murder as efficient and low-cost as possible. I have been unable to unearth any specifics about the alleged entire state bureaucracy, official documents, directives, blueprints, and other records which the Germans were known to be meticulous about, and the second statement appears to be at odds with what actually happened. Now, there is no denying that German science and engineering was second to none at the beginning of World War II. Planes, tanks, the V-1 and V-2, and other weaponry were quickly developed, and their rocket scientists were snatched up by the US and the Soviets for their space programs at the end of the war. So the question is, given the technological expertise that was available, were the Germans so stupid that they would leave it to prison camp commanders to devise their own methods for carrying out the greatest mass murder in history? But no matter how many died, each and every one of these deaths was a tragedy, as were the deaths of millions of others during this terrible conflict. But this does not mean that we should be prevented from finding out how and why they died. No nation, organization, association, no religious sect, no open, closed or secret society, nor any individual has the right to prevent me from seeking the answers to these and other questions, should I choose to ask them privately or publicly. It is my right under the protection of Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It is also yours.
That was a bit of a preface, an excerpt from a video by Anthony Lawson, who I think made some good points about this entire drama surrounding, as we're told, one of the most important and horrible atrocities in the modern world. And yet we're not allowed to examine it in any greater detail. We are simply to receive its unadulterated doctrine. It is to remain unquestioned and pure, if you will, as given to us from the media pulpits of the Church of Guilt, Shame, and Victimhood. Well, this is, as you know, if you are a regular listener, Red Eyes Radio, an independent, truth-seeking radio program that is all about dispelling the mythmakers, questioning everything that we've been told, and examine the things that we are not supposed to. If you want more of what we do, redicecreations.com is the website. Well, the topic, as I'm sure you've been able to figure out, is really about making critical thinking illegal. In our time, there's no question so ripe for the picking, considering that in many countries it has been legislated that this event is not to be questioned or even examined in any way at all. The Holocaust has therefore turned into a new kind of religion, and just like in the time of the church, it has its own inquisition, inquisitors and enforcers, but now it's NGOs and anti-free speech groups out there who do everything they can to prevent discussion, questioning, and opposition to the dogma from being heard. Ole Dammegård, who has been with us many times before on the program, returns today to share some of his own research and thoughts on this very convoluted and difficult subject. We, as always, suggest that you keep an open mind, but not so much that your brain falls out. Listen and do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Feel free to disagree, but don't do it on the basis of not having listened to the critique. And don't do it on the basis of fallacies such as appeal to authority, saying that, people with more authority than us have told us, therefore it is true. Or the other fallacy, argentum ad populum, appeal to the people or appeal to popularity, which is basically because everyone knows it, therefore it is true. In addition to speaking with our guest today and addressing some of the questions that he has about all of this, we've also added some links to some videos in the relevant links section for this program on redicecreations.com and redicemembers.com that we think will put some of the things that we've been told in perspective and give us the other side to the story that has become so central to how, unfortunately, we've come to define ourselves, especially in Europe and the West. Now, if something is amiss, I can't stress enough the importance of us not only knowing about this, but also that we must actively not allow ourselves to be bullied into silence by exaggerations and misinformation. And we must not give way and give up who we are and unlearn to feel resentment for our people, who we've been told not only allowed this atrocity to happen, but somehow that we systematically encouraged it, and that we are to carry the blame over generations like it's some kind of religious doctrine. Anyway, an endless string of, I think, good reasons could preface this program for why this is a topic worth to examine in greater detail. And I hope that you understand and appreciate the importance of it. But we'd be stuck here all day just doing that. So let's just kick off the show and listen to what our guest has to say in this extended one-segment program. Welcome back, Mr. Dammegård. It's very nice to have you back, as always. Thank you for returning so soon again. I hope you've been doing well since we last spoke.
Yeah, I've been doing absolutely great. So much to do. I mean, there's so many things happening in the world and so much to keep exposing, because there's so many lies around that are forcing us into a very unpleasant direction, I think, if we don't wake up.
I think you're right. I certainly think you hit the nail on the head, as they say. It's just tremendously important that we dare and have the courage to talk about some of the things that are important for us to see the bigger picture and for us to realize what methods they're using against us to shut us down, to make us self-censor, to basically not rationally look at certain things. And obviously that's where we're going to go with this conversation today, Ole, because we brushed on this topic very lightly last time you were on the program. We were talking about false flags, and I mean, that's your specialty, if you will. You look at conspiracies, shining a light on them, and trying to figure out, what happened. And it might be, in all cases, that we don't have all the answers. We as far as I'm seeing your work, Ole, you look at inconsistencies in it. You try to figure out what doesn't make sense in terms of what we know already. How do we approach the issue of false reporting and all these issues? And it's tremendously important. But why did you feel the need to go into this controversial area, if you will? I mean, it's the most controversial area that there is, I'd say, today. Why is this an important topic to you?
I tell you, I have been letting the truth guide me for so many years. I've demoted myself to say, wherever the truth will lead me, I will follow. And this has taken me into some very, very dangerous areas. I mean, I've had people killed around me. I had to leave Sweden and move to Spain here to get away from threats and so on. So the truth can be extremely powerful. And I so love the truth because it's so simple. It never needs to defend itself. It is just the truth stands for itself with no explanations. The truth is just the truth. And whatever case you look at, there is a truth. There's always a truth. And it's, like I said, the truth is very simple. It can be hard to find, but when you get to the core of it, it's simple. But when somebody's making a conspiracy or trying to cover something up, they do it with the help of so-called lies. And the more lies, the more messy it gets. And the easier or the more obvious as well it is to track down and see, hang on, something is not right here. There's something strange going on. And then by either following the lies, because the lies will also guide you towards the truth if you just follow them and take care of them one by one, because there's always a reason for the lies. And this is what I've devoted some 30 years of my life to find out the real truth about what is going on. Because like you as well, I mean, you have devoted your life to this as well. There is a very sinister agenda going on behind what the official story is telling us.
Yeah.
And today we're heading into an area that I feel a little bit nervous about, because I've seen people getting totally destroyed for speaking out about this. I've seen their careers go totally smashed. I've seen people being put in prison just for raising questions about it. And so I think, well, the more they try to stop this, the more important it is for us to speak out about it and talk about it and just use normal logic to see what's going on. And I would very much like to look at history, but with an open mind instead of just buying into the official story.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what sparked your curiosity in this area? Was it a few years ago and you just kind of avoided it, or was it just very recently? Because I mean, as I said, you've been looking at all kinds of historical frauds and false flags and propaganda and lies and these kinds of things. And I think there's a reluctancy to look at this area because there's just so much horror and carnage and bloodshed and misery surrounding it that I think most people, just on an emotional level, are choosing to stay away from it. But when did you get your eyes open to this?
Do you know, it's like they say, I mean, many different people are being said that have been quoted saying this, but the bigger the lie, the easier it is for people to believe it. And this lie we're talking about today, I mean, it's the size, it's astronomical. I think this and Hitler and the history around Hitler, the whole creation of him and what he was up to and the whole thing, these are some of the biggest conspiracies or cover-ups in the world ever.
Yeah.
And it's totally mind-blowing when you see the magnitude of it. But if this was only historical events, I wouldn't care so much about it. But it is because these things are being used to this very day in a very, very powerful and very dark way to cover up and justify awful things in the world today, absolute awful things. And it's also being used as like a brick wall. So as soon as someone like myself with just an open mind and a logical brain says, hang on a second, this doesn't really make sense. I mean, come on, where do you get these numbers from? How do you make this possible? Because when you look at it, it's not really possible. But as soon as you even start pointing accusingly or with a critical question, they threaten you. People have been put to jail. They've been, like I said, they've had their lives and careers, everything totally destroyed to this very day just by raising questions. And I say, was it Voltaire that said, if you want to find out who is controlling you or who is the real power, just look at the ones you can't criticize. Mm-hmm. And here we are.
Yeah, that's correct.
We are not allowed to criticize this. And this is why I contacted you to say, let's do it. Because you suggested it. I said, okay, let's do it. Because whatever the response will be for it, what will be. But this needs to be exposed big time.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need more brave people just looking at it, and I think one of the important things, there are many important things to remember, and you can add preface after preface and justifying, why you're, should be allowed to look at it and whatnot. But just for the facts that you said there, the very aspect that it has become one of the areas that you're not allowed to touch. I mean, that in itself, and the way that people have been persecuted for going after this question and not making any, really value judgments surrounding it, not really saying exactly what happened and whatnot, but just, as you said, pointing out the questions and then ending up in so much trouble. That is it's a factor which is very important to remember. And also, of course, if it is the truth, then it should be able to stand on its own. It should be able to stand up to scrutiny. It should be able to be questioned and, of course, then proven right. But the very aspect that we're not even allowed to either disprove it or prove it right says something. There's legal structures in place in certain countries where, it by law has established, it's been by law established that, the official story, as we get to it more or less, that's what happened. And it doesn't matter. I mean, the facts doesn't, pertain to reality in this case. It's just, this is what happened according to the law. And therefore, if you question that, you break that law. And I mean, it's astonishing that we've gotten to this place, especially in the West, Ole, where we have a proud tradition of questioning and philosophizing and free speech and all these things. But all of a sudden, that has gone out the window.
It's like this conversation, if we had it in Germany now, we would be put to jail. This is bizarre just for talking about this in a critical way. And I'm used to speak to speak. I've given hundreds of interviews about assassinations and very touchy areas and false flag operation, ongoing false flag operation, touchy things around that. And normally sometimes I get strange reactions because people say, oh, come on, I cannot believe, it can't be like that. But then when I present the facts, they very often say, oh my God, it's incredible, but I can see where you come from. But this area, I mean, as soon as I started mentioning that I was coming on your show and we were going to talk about this, people just get almost pale and say, What?
Yeah.
Why? What? But
now you're with them, Ole. Now you've right.
No, but also it's sort of like, and I really want to point out, for me, this has nothing to do about not liking Jews, Muslims, Christian, Catholic. For me, it doesn't matter if you're red, white, blue, black, if you're Buddhist or a Hindu or a Jew or a Muslim, if you're a decent person that treats people around you with love and respect, I mean, my God, I totally embrace you. But if you're up to screw up the world for the rest, and be part of very dark and sinister agendas that are hurting the world, then I will expose it. I will do everything I can to expose it. And here we are at the very core of some very, very dark stuff. And this is why we have this discussion today. And I've been a bit nervous to come on the show because I have no idea what's going to happen about this, but it just makes it even more important to show it. And what I would very much like to do is, instead of just having an opinion, I would very much like to just go into some details about this whole Holocaust thing and just point out things so that people with an open mind can start seeing, well, hang on, that sort of makes sense or not. It's up to the listeners to make up their mind. But I just want to point out some stuff that made me wake up. And you asked about when did I wake up? I've been, for the last, I don't know how many years, at least 30 years, I've been looking into these things. I've done a lot of traveling around. I've visited some of the concentration camps. I've been to many historical sites from the First and Second World War. I've been to the Hitler's Eagle's Nest, all of these places, you know. And there's always been sort of a strange thing around this that it doesn't make sense. There's something that doesn't fit in, you know. And especially around the gas chambers, I could never get it to match up because it didn't make sense. How could they dispose of 6 million people the way it's supposedly we're being told? It just doesn't match up when you start seeing the equipment they had, the locations they had, the transport system, the architecture of the stuff, you know, and these are the things that have made me sort of been very critical over the years in this area, and the more I look into it, the more astounded I am by the facts that are coming forward more and more.
Yeah, you bet. Now, later in the program, I want to talk a little bit more about some, you know, maybe some of the reactions that people might have, or we can speak about, I guess, the psychological and emotional impact, and potentially also why it's being, you know, so vehemently defended by people who maybe don't know that much about it, but also maybe people who, you know, think they know a lot about it. There's a lot of aspects to this that we can, you know, deconstruct, and we'll try to get some of those questions later. But just as you said, I think we should just dedicate some time here then into looking at what is the image that we've been presented with, what are the things that are countering the things we've been presented with, and why then, Ole, in your view, some of the things doesn't make sense. What are some of the, I mean, it's a massive issue and a massive story. There are people that have dedicated a good portion of their lives just researching and looking into this. There's a number of people that have come out of this world, if you will, that are scholars, that are scientists. They are you know, people from all walks of life that have found an interest in various ways for this. But give us your view about why you don't think that it occurred in the way that we've been told that it occurred.
What I want to say is that I don't say that Jews were not killed. Absolutely. Thousands and thousands of people and Jews were killed in the Second World. I'm not saying that. The thing that I'm reacting against, that I want to open up this discussion around, is the extermination plan of the Jewish race, the gas chambers, and the numbers of people killed or murdered in these gas chambers. The number 6 million, people think that, yeah, that was it. That is it. 6 million, that's it. And but very few people, I think, are aware of that. This number, 6 million, occurred, I think it was 236 times from 1890 up until the Nuremberg trial after the Second World War. It was absolutely nothing new. it was being pumped out in newspapers all over the world on a regular basis. The Jews, that they were being prosecuted and they were being threatened, and the number 6 million was being, I don't know why they used this number, if there was a reason for that, but it was a number that was being pumped out from multiple sources during many, many years.
Yeah, from 1880 and then onwards all the way up?
I think it was from the first time it was in 1890, as far as I know, and as 231 or 36 times that it has been counted, that this 6 million thing
has come up in the media somewhere. Yeah.
Exactly, because it's not 5.5 million, it's not 4.2 million, it's always been 6 million, 6 million, 6 million, 6 million. And at the Nuremberg trial, 6 million. It's like that. But if you look at the different death camps and the different concentration camps and so on, the official numbers have never, ever been able to show 6 million. They've shown a lot less. And when you really start looking into the numbers instead of just somebody saying something, but when you start looking into how the numbers have been counted, how and then the names and identity of the people, that was transported to these so-called death camps and that did not get out alive and so on, it has never, ever got anywhere close to 6 million. And for instance, if you take Majdanek, which was one of these so-called death camps, the first museum that was open after the Second World War, it said on the wall, 2 million dead Jewish dead people there. In 1944, that the number, the official number, was not 2 million; it was 1.7 million. I mean, we're talking 300,000 people's difference. That is a whole city, Then at the Nuremberg trial, a few years later, it was 1.5 million. That's 500,000 less. In 1975, there were new official numbers coming out. It was 1,380,000. In 1991, suddenly the numbers came down. I mean, we're talking about these different organizations who have been trying to prove how many people that was actually killed there. In 1991, we're down to 360,000. That's from 2 million to 360,000.
Yeah.
Then in 1992, it was 235,000. Then in 1998, it was 42,200. And that number was later changed because, I don't know why, but 2005, it was up to 78,000. So as far as I know, that is the official number from Majdanek now, 78,000. But we're talking from 2 million down to 78,000. That is a massive difference, I would say. And anyone that can come out and officially claim a number like that, that later turns out to be a total lie, we need to look more, we check these sources out because apparently they cannot be trusted.
Yeah. Well, there's so many aspects to this. It's kind of difficult to know where to tackle it. But the main point here, I think, to try to get focus on is how things have changed through time. I listened to David Irving. He's an interesting historian that has dedicated his life to this. He's written the only biography, I think, on Hitler and a number of other things. And he talked about still to this day that the archives, the paperwork is in such shambles. I think the majority of the papers is in Britain, but it's been divided up too. And the way that they've been trying to archive and go through everything and whatnot. But the bottom line is that according to him, there have not been found an official paper trail for the extermination plan. And of course, this is one of the major, problems that they have done in order to try to, reason around this. But I mean, what's interesting here is how they've managed to, in my view, kind of construct something, in hindsight, in afterwards. I don't want to jump ahead too much already here, but just the way that I think an important issue for people to remember is that you can't go into this question and be armed with everything you've been told about it. because then you're missing the point, and you're trying to piece it together. Just pretend you don't know anything about it, and then deconstruct it up from the ground up, and try to look at, okay, what has been exaggerated, what was propaganda, etc. But there's so many clues here. There's so many different aspects to this that it is important to look at in order to try to get a bearing on what actually happened, and in what order did it occur, how much official plans was in the works at this time. What do you think happened?
It's a really tricky one. But one thing that is very important to understand is after every single war, the history is written by the conqueror, the winner. They are the ones that write the history books saying we were the heroes and they were the bad guys. And in this case, after the Second World War, the bad guys was officially the Germans. They are the ones who are blamed for everything, and they are the ones who have been having to carry all this guilt for so many years.
Yeah.
And this whole Holocaust thing, it was not something that was pumped out right after the Second World War. It was not something that in the 50s people were like, oh my God, the Holocaust. As far as I know, it was sometimes in the 70s that this suddenly was boosted up.
Yep.
In a way that was totally like, whoa, where did that come from? And once again, like when you look at many different conspiracies, and also like the whole moon hoax and so on, Hollywood has a part of it in this whole propaganda machine.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hollywood part is, you really have to be aware of that one, because they used Hollywood from day one and pumped it out in different ways. It was like when they liberated Dachau, General Eisenhower, he got one of the film directors from Hollywood. It was a man by George D. Stevens. He was a director from Hollywood. He had done Laurel and Hardy, Elizabeth Taylor, many of these big. I don't know how many Oscars he won. And they got him to Normandy. He filmed there, but also when they filmed the liberation of Dachau, he was there filming loads and loads and loads of this footage that we are being presented with again and again and again. And the footage that I think all of us have seen are these awful mass graves, when you see this bulldozer, just pushing down dead bodies and so on. And you think that is part of the death machine, the German death machine. But we are not being informed that it was actually that when they came towards this concentration camp, the commander, the German commander, his name was Josef Kramer. He was no longer in command, but when the Allies approached the camp, he sent up soldiers there saying, please be careful, very careful, because we have a lot of typhus and different diseases going here. Please, you cannot just let the prisoners go, because it will start a whole epidemic, here. So please. So the Allies said, for sure, they came in, they liberated the camp, but they kept the prisoners there because there was so much typhus and other awful diseases there. But what they also did was to find out the death toll, and because they heard all of these stories, they dug up some of these mass graves. And this is what we see. These bodies were pulled up, counted and checked out, and then they were bulldozed down into that. That is what is being filmed. And the guy driving the bulldozer is actually a British officer. But when you see it, you think, oh, it must be a Nazi, part of the whole Nazi war or death machine that we're seeing here. And also the reason for them being so starved, and so, many of these victims died from starvation.
Sure.
And typhus. These were, I would say, one of the major killers in this area. But the reason why they were so undernourished, one of the major reasons was because this was the end of the war, when Germany was totally bombed out from the Allies and the British, the Royal Air Force and the Americans that just bombed the crap out of Germany. And these concentration camps were located very close to big industries like IG Farben and other companies, because that was where the labor was needed. And so when the trains and the tracks and everything was bombed, there was no way that food and these things could come to these camps either. And at the same time, the German population was totally starved as well. So it was an awful situation for the whole of Europe, and very much so for Germany.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have to keep that in mind when we see these awful images of these very, very thin and skinny people that have been starved to death and so on. You have to ask yourself, why did they die like that? And I would say the bombings is a major part of this, because these were, to a great extent, what do you call it? Work camps. I mean, they were there.
Exactly. This was a slave labor. They wanted to have production to fuel the war that was ongoing. This is absolutely true, And the fact is, what I think as well, Ole, is that what's strange about this, I think something happened before the war that many people miss out about, and that's the official boycott campaign against Germany. There's a famous headline, people can Google it, they'll find it, called "Judea Declares War on Germany." And what's so strange in this situation is that you had many Jews living in Germany at the time, and they didn't have a country. It basically means that you had within the country potential foreign elements. See, this would happen in any other war scenario. This is what people need to understand, that if German soldiers were caught in England, or even Germans, if war had been declared between Germany and England, the German people would have been rounded up, and they would have been put in concentration camps or in other facilities as a way to make sure that these who are potential enemy combatants don't decide to strike military targets within the country, etc. And that's one of the reasons. There's many other reasons. There's a whole game here of things that we could talk about. But one of the reasons is that it was, I think, and even if it was very official or unofficial, there was a declaration of war to a certain extent that occurred. And that's one of the reasons why they said, okay, we need to try to contain the issue and contain the problem. And a plus for them in a bonus situation is, of course, that they could also start an industry of slave labor to be able to feed the war machine. That's what I think occurred anyway. What do you think, Ole?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And I just want to say also, we're talking about Germans. I mean, Germany before the Second World War and the whole thing was an extremely intelligent people, very, I mean, this is the thing when you talk about Germany, you say they're so organized, they're so disciplined, they're so square-headed, the ding, 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 order muss sein. And then here, suddenly when we talk about these labor camps or so-called death camps, suddenly the figures doesn't match up, the architecture doesn't make up. It's totally when we're going to go into how the gas chambers were constructed, so stupidly done if they were gas chambers. But if they were used for something totally different, then it all makes sense. The rest of the camps, very organized, very strict and very controlled. And then around the gas chambers, absolute mayhem. It doesn't match up again. I just want to point out also with this footage that we see from so many of these concentration camps, please notice that it is very often the same images you're being shown again and again and again and again. And when the Soviet troops came and liberated Auschwitz, what they told you, or if you look into it really, they wanted to film. And they said it was awful what they saw, but they did not film when they liberated it because they said they couldn't film inside the bunkers or inside the buildings because there was no electricity, so there was no light, so they couldn't film. So what they did was instead they filmed the people on their way home. And if you look at these people, they're most of them well-fed. look at this Russian footage. It's not at all this thing where they're totally skinny and totally half dead and stumbling around. Not at all. And then they said that some weeks later, they had Polish from the population and so on, and people who had been in the camp as well. They called them back and got them into the buildings, and then they could film when they were lying in all of these bunks and so on. But that we're never told that. We're told, if we get the impression that they came in and filmed the camps the way they were. No, they were not. And you can even see this film director, George Stevens, in one of the footage, the film sequences where they hold this guy, he can barely stand outside the door, and it looks like, oh, total mayhem. And suddenly the film director from Hollywood just comes in from the left and, oops, sorry, I'm in the way, and goes out again.
Yep, I remember seeing that.
It's a bit like the moon hoax, where suddenly, the moon falls down in the background and the lighting drops out and the shadows doesn't match up. And please, for anyone doubting these things, when you look at how many times we have been duped, it's unreal. So if we're duped once again in this topic, I would say it's very possible.
Now, someone did a pretty gruesome video, I guess, at least if we take the accounts as we get them to us, the official story. If they're not, then it's less gruesome. But the person did try to show, or they examined how an efficient extermination camp would look. It's very, I think the difference, one thing I want to point out before we continue, is that usually what we get, and this is an interesting factor in terms of, psychology and approach to the topic, but all of the videos that I've seen and people in trying to look at this from another view than the official story, they go straight for the big picture. They zoom out. They look at, okay, where are we? When are we looking at this? What happened? Who is involved? What is going on? How was this supposedly done? How could it have been done that way? Very, very, again, meticulous, kind of very, very scientific, very rational, which is good. The other approach that we usually get from the official story is that we never hear too much about those things, at least not in the beginning. They always begin by zooming into the closest story you can imagine of, let's say, a little girl or something like that. You don't know what's going on. You don't know where are we? What's happening? Why is this happening? What's the explanation for, who are these evil people? What are they doing? Why are they doing this? They zoom into the most closest emotional story that they can find, I believe, Ole, as a way to make you forget about those bigger questions of forgetting about, wait a minute, why is this even happening? Is there any reason behind this? And because this is in most cases why reason goes out the window. That's why so many people are explaining all the time. There's who would have such evil within them? Why did they do this? It's just we can't understand, right? That's usually what we get.
I always get to that thing that I can expose what happened, how it was carried out, but the mentality behind many of these atrocities, it's beyond me. I do not understand it at all. So I've given up to try and understand evil and just focus on exposing it, let the truth out there, and let it liberate us.
Right, exactly. No, what I'm saying is that it's just, I think the evil doesn't make sense because we haven't gotten the full story. That's what I'm getting to here.
Yeah, I understand.
But go ahead, Ole.
The thing is, like I said, I've been to quite a few of these different concentration camps and so on. And to start with, it was told to the rest of us that all of them had gas chambers and were extermination camps. But then over the years, fewer and fewer and fewer, and none of them in Germany that we could check out because we had the Iron Curtain, is that we couldn't go into Poland and so on for many years. There's so many years we couldn't go and see for ourselves. And to start with, the German camps suddenly, there were no death camps in Germany. Suddenly,
and that was retracted, right? Because initially that was not the case, but then all in the West.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. No, first we were told, no, all of them had gas chambers there. That's how they did it. That's how they did it. This was a killing machine of a magnitude never ever seen before. But then, just like you say, when you go close and you start saying, okay, so let me see the evidence. Let me see how did they do it and so on. Then suddenly, nope, no, sorry, not here, not there. So one of the things, I've been to Sachsenhausen, Auschwitz, these Treblinka, and when you're there and you look at it, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, how was it physically possible or technically possible to do this? And when you hear the stories, I think it's very important as well to listen to the witnesses of these people, because very often they're handpicked people, I would say, and very often they're related as well. And many times, when they repeat their stories, they do not repeat the same story. And that one is for me like, whoa, hang on a second.
Yeah.
If you've seen something that awful, it would it would make an imprint on your brain that you would never get rid of. I mean, I've spoken to people that have been traumatized from awful things. It's there. It will never leave them, you know. And here suddenly they talk about these awful things and then they keep changing it. Very odd. And once again, these are things that say, whoop, I need to check this out. If you start wobbling around with the facts that are that important, we need to check it out.
Yeah, there are many young people as well, of course, that we get testimony from. Let's talk about the eyewitnesses a little bit later, because that's a very important thing in this. But, you know, as you detailed, there are many different camps. You know, there were, I tried to find an official number, how many camps there was. Someone gave me 20,000, you know. If that's true, I don't know. But we have the big ones, you know, as you said, you have Majdanek, you have obviously the Auschwitz / Birkenau. Birkenau was basically the place where they stayed, if you will. That was the actual location of the housing, if you will. You had Dachau, Buchenwald, Treblinka, Sobibor, many others, and so there was a division between the camps that was in the west and then those who were in the east, and that there was a separation that occurred, that somewhere along the line the story started to differ between the eastern versus the western side, right?
Yeah. And this whole thing with the gas chambers, it came from the Soviets. You know, in the end of the war, everybody was trying to get to Berlin first of all, to get there first. So you had the Allies, the English, the Soviet Union, all of them were trying to get there. And that's why some of the camps were liberated by the Russian army and some were from the Allies and so on. But the whole rumor or the reports, as far as I know, of these gas chambers came from the Soviets. And they also were the ones that handed out the numbers, the death numbers and so on, which has later turned out to be absolute false. But when you look at these, like for instance, if we look at Treblinka, as far as I know, the official story is about 700,000 people, Jews, that was gassed, buried there. Then later they were dug up and cremated. That is the official story. Wow. Because they say that that the Germans they gassed them and just buried them, but then when towards the end of the war, Hitler and the guys said, "Oh my God, they're gonna find out what we've been up to. So dig all the victims up and cremate them, and then get rid of the evidence that way." I mean, but we're talking about like 700,000. They say you do that. If you just take the size of a body and multiply it with 700,000, we're talking like massive big mass graves. I mean, incredibly big. And there's an additional 50,000 that is said to have been gassed and then cremated straight away. So they weren't buried and dug up. But when you look at the Treblinka gas chamber, once again, we look at it and what did they tell you? The official story is that it was diesel engines that was pumping out. They were not using Cyclone B. They were using diesel engines, and that they gassed them with the exhaust. But you look at it chemically, diesel exhaust, it will give you nausea. It will give you a massive headache. but it will not kill you. So here we are. They're officially killed by diesel engines, and you can see the machine room, everything with the big diesel engines. How did they do it? How did they do it with a diesel engine? They're even, you got TV ads nowadays where there was especially one where a guy tried to commit suicide in a new car with a diesel engine, and he wakes up the next morning feeling fine because the diesel is it's not mortal.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, that is a major one that just says absolute lie. There's a total lie being told here. Then if, I don't know if you want to say anything about Treblinka, otherwise I'll just go on to Auschwitz and...
I wanted to just mention, there are obviously a number of videos that have been made that are pretty good, that also detail some of the numbers here that we yet haven't gone into, but I'm just mentioning to people that I'll add some of the links here so that people who want to look into this for themselves and have an open view on this and say, all right, I'll look at what the evidence is that these guys present, and I'll make it up for myself, or I'll make up my mind about it. But anyway, look at those, because they detail, again, the very gruesome details, it might seem on the surface, but it's a necessary if we are to get to the truth with all things. But they examine the very volume of bodies, for example, that had to be disposed if they were first buried, as you said, and then dug up and burnt later, and the sheer the monumental task of doing this, and even the volume that is entailed in all of this is very, very, I mean, when you kind of see it in front of you laid out with the numbers, and you see the sizes, and you try to also look at some of the camp areas and see, wait a minute, where could they have possibly even fit all these people if it took place as you think it would? So therefore, I urge people to look at those. There's one, for example, called the one third of the Holocaust, where they look at, I think it is Treblinka specifically, and they go through this very question, Ole, and examine that, there is an awful lot of bodies here, and for them to be burnt in the way they were, with the kind of winters that they had in Poland at that time, it's very, very difficult to pull this off.
Yeah, and the thing is that if you go to a crematory, is that what you call it in English? I think so, where you burn bodies after when somebody has died.
Yep.
It takes a lot, a body does not burn easily. I mean, we're to a very large extent water, and it's not easy to burn something. And also, when you burn the body, you still end up with the skeleton, the skull, and all of these things that had to, you have to deal with that as well.
Be crushed or something like that. Yeah.
Crushed, yeah. And the time to burn a body, it's like at least an hour. If you haven't got, even nowadays with super duper, very efficient ovens and so on, I think they're down to, 40 minutes or something like that. But when you look at these guys, when they talk about the witnesses from the Holocaust, they're talking about that it took 20 minutes, and that they put, after they were gassed, they put them in the crematorium, and they put like up to 5 on top of each other and stack them in there to get burned at the same time. But when you look at the ovens, you can't do it.
No.
You max 2. I've seen them. It's like maximum 2 bodies on top of each other, and hardly that.
Now, the reason, I was going to mention that as well, Ole, the reason, of course, why they had crematoria, you detailed this earlier, but, typhus is a form of lice, very detrimental at the time. It did kill a lot of people, and the crematoria was involved in burning the bodies of the people that had died during that time. And the numbers were quite high, of course, because, as you said, there was a detrimental effects around here. There was, a lot of things that were going on that, didn't account for the best, living experience, if we can call it that. And that's one of the reasons why they had these ovens at most of the camps. But as you say, the mathematics alone of calculating, per body, how many hours it took, and then looking at the official numbers, it just doesn't make sense. So if anything, then something else had to be used to incinerate all these bodies that they claim, not in the way that we're being told anyway.
Yeah. And I'm saying, I'm not saying that all the survivors, people who were in these awful camps, I mean, for sure they were awful. And I'm not saying that all of the survivors are lying. Absolutely not. But Treblinka was like a train station where they were divided up and then sent out to many, like you said, there were so many different camps, and it was like a train central. So many people or in the camps, when they were divided into men and women and children into different groups, and when they saw them walk into these buildings, never to be seen again, and then later told that they had been gassed and burned. That is what they've believed ever since, because they never saw the people that went into these buildings. But the thing is, many of them, I would say most of them, went into these buildings and was taken care of, which we're going to describe the techniques, how they did it. And then on the other side, they were put on trains and taken to other camps.
Right.
So many people, very few people that have survived have been in the so-called in the teams that took care of the bodies, because they had Jews that took care of the bodies after they had been gassed and pulled them to the crematoria, burned them, and took care of that whole thing. But very few people have survived that saw all the steps, from going in, undressing, being gassed, and then put in the ovens and taken care of. Very few witnesses have seen this. So that's why we have to look very closely at what these people are saying, because that is the whole synopsis in one go.
Yeah.
If you understand what I'm saying.
Sure. I mean, I can imagine, obviously, the rumors as well that was going around at the time. I mean, this was not on a voluntary basis. This was very, forcefully done. And you could just imagine, obviously, it's understandable. It's human psychology. Like, what is going on? Oh my God, they're gonna kill us, right? I mean, so the question is, what happened, of course, in these trains on the way there, and then you have the scenario then that they shaved people's heads. They were issued a camp uniform, more or less, I believe, because the typhus issue was so ubiquitous everywhere that they tried to delouse the clothes, and they deloused certain things, which they used Cyclone B in certain places as well. You can even see the blue residue in some of these rooms where they actually deloused the clothing. So one can just imagine what one might have been thinking when you saw all of this, when this was going on. You might never have seen something like this before in your life.
No, it must have been awful, absolutely awful. And for sure, the chimneys, there was smoke coming from the chimneys all the time because bodies were being burnt. But we're talking about the gas chamber thing. That is the issue, not that people died there.
Sure, of course.
So in 1942, that was when this whole typhus thing started, and it hit especially the areas where the hygiene and these... when people were very crowded, that was the area where this lice really went for it. So it became very, very dangerous. And so in these camps, what they did was they started a whole new, and it wasn't only in the camps, they did it in many, many different areas as well in Europe at the same time, was that people had to shave the hair off because that is where the lice were, and also get the clothes off and get them cleaned. So what happened was when they came with these trainloads of people, they were taken off on the so-called train station near the camp, or the camps had their own sort of like train station, and then they were divided up in men on one side and women, children on the other side. They were also divided up in people that was fit for work, what type of work they could do, what type of career they had, if they were a carpenter, an electrician, or whatever. They were divided up depending on where they were needed, and then transported in different directions all over the place. But before that, they had to be deloused, and So they shaved their heads and they took their clothes. They gathered all the clothes. They got them uniforms on these stripy uniforms, and then they had a shower. They were, what do you call it? They were the one before DDT. They were spraying them with different things to get rid of these lice and so on.
Yeah,
and then put in the uniforms, and then transported into the camps. But the clothes and the shoes, everything of that was piled up and put in special rooms, which are the ones that are being named death chambers many times.
Yeah.
Where they killed the lice with Cyclone B, which was the predecessor to what was called DDT, if you remember that, very toxic, but anti-lice, anti-bug spray. And so in these rooms they had the Cyclone B gas that was heated up and in the walls, and then sprayed over the clothes. And then there were openings in the ceiling, and then the gas went out there. But it wasn't even dangerous enough so that the people who did this had to have gas masks. It wasn't even that dangerous, but it killed the lice, and it stopped to a very big extent the spreading of this awful typhus and so on.
So ironically, Ole, this was done to actually save lives.
If you look at the death toll before and after, it went down because of these things. So it's like very, very confusing when you look at these things, because you have to really open your mind and see, whoa, is this actually possible? Because in these chambers where they did take care of the clothes and so on, that is where you find the residue in the walls from Cyclone B. They're blue. There's an iron
Prussian
oxide.
blue, they call it, from Prussia. In
very,
Germany.
very clear blue. But the so-called gas chambers, the ones that we've seen on these Hollywood movies, Schindler's List and other things, like where it was told that they went in there and the gas was dropped down from openings in the ceiling. It looked like they were there to take a shower, but instead of water, there were gas coming. And that killed it took about some 20 minutes. They died, and then all of these bodies was then pulled out and taken to the crematorium and burnt there. That's the official story. But when you look at how they were constructed, we're talking like German efficiency, German discipline, German order, muss sein. And here, when you look at the way these are built, absolutely awful quality. And many of them, in Auschwitz and other concentration camps, it has later turned out that they were altered after the end of the war
by Russian troops, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Why they did that, I'm not really sure. But like, for instance, the chimneys that you see, the awful chimneys, they're not even connected to the ovens. They're just chimneys. And when you look in the rooms where the showers and this is where they were killed, you see that they're in some of these concentration camps. In some of them, they're like windows where you can just knock out with a fist,
Yeah.
And here they say that thousands of people have died in there and struggled, and that you could find, that they scratched into the concrete with their bloody fingers, trying to get out. And then there's a window, and also there are wooden doors where the gas could leak out very easy, and the door could very easily be pushed out. It doesn't make sense. And then you see, for instance, in Auschwitz, there's a big open room, but you can see where they've knocked down walls. That it was before that it was separate rooms, and also these several of them are underground. And when you look at it, the way on the early drawings and so on, where it says was that these were morgues, and the reason why they were underground was to keep as cool as possible for the bodies not to deteriorate too quickly.
Right.
Because we're talking about thousands and thousands of prisoners, deceased, all of these things, starvation, people died there. So they needed to get rid of these bodies. And many times, if they dug them down in the ground, it was contaminate the water, the groundwater. So they needed to burn them.
So that's a important thing to remember as well, because obviously the way then that they throw in the Cyclone B pellets and these kinds of things is a very difficult process to do it in that way. But you even have to have, for example, the room at a higher, a permanent temperature for the gas to actually be released. I think it's cyanide. Is it hydrogen cyanide or cyanide acid? What is it called again?
I don't know the chemical. I got it here somewhere.
Yeah, I'll find it in a moment here. But yeah, exactly. But anyway, it's a quite complex procedure to have the gas released out of these pellets. And you think if they built it kind of underground to keep it cool, that would be counterintuitive to the way you would have to heat up the room consequently to release the gas, for example.
But it's also when you see, they pumped up the numbers to try and make logic to get it up to these incredible amounts like 6 million and so on. So the official story is that every time they filled the gas chamber in Auschwitz with about 2,000 people. When you look at 2,000 people, the body volume, they're like standing up against, you cannot even sit down in the area where we're talking about. So you can push 2,000 in there, gas them, but what then happened and what the so-called witnesses that were there and taking care of the bodies, they said that they were standing up and they died standing up,
Right, well, so many of them also crowded, yeah.
Yeah, but here we are again with the doors, opening the wrong way, the holes in the ceiling where they threw down the Cyclone B. They later found out that they have been recreated, as it's called. That they were not there to start with, but they were put there by the Soviets and then put together, closed, and then open up again when they made it into a museum. So it's not the actual ones, and they're leaking. It's so badly done, Anyway,
do you remember too? There was a couple of things there. For example, where there was an elevator that was to bring up the bodies up to the crematory, and it was in one of the camps. I think this was Auschwitz, if I remember correctly. Sorry if I get this wrong, exactly what camp it was, but it was laid out in such a way that it was very, very inconvenient to try to get all the bodies out of this room where they had been gassed up, one floor up to where the crematory was, and it was just so small. You'd be amazed that they would make it so difficult for themselves if this was the plan.
Now, there's two buildings called the gas chambers built in an angle, and then there's only one little door opening to get all of these bodies out into an elevator up and then pulled over and put into the crematory. I mean, God, if you have to do that with 2,000 bodies, it's like unreal, the amount of work.
Yeah, every half hour you do something like that, even if it's the numbers.
We're talking about that the people that did that was like 5 or 10 working there to do these things. But also when you listen to these people, they say that the bodies turn black and blue. But when you look at somebody who's been gassed in that way, their body should be totally pink.
Right.
They go when you're gassed in that way, the blood it just expands on the inside. There's no way for it to get out, and the body itself, you can see that on autopsy photos. It gets a very bright pink color, very, very strong reddish pink color. But here, the so-called witnesses said they were black and blue. Does not make up. And also, these are the same people that also said that we stacked the bodies on top of each other. Well, there was no room inside the ovens. So how did you do that? The same people that also said it took 20 minutes, where it's absolutely impossible to do it in 20 minutes. Also, how many, even if you stack them 5 on top of each other with the gas chambers that was there, it would take like, I don't know how long to get rid of 2,000, and then less up to the millions that we're talking about. It is not possible. It is just not possible.
Yeah, there was interesting testimony from one of the Sonderkommando, as they call them. I think they were
the name of them.
Yeah, they were assigned with overseeing this process basically, and they were, of course, part of the camp people themselves. But there's this one testimony. It's in another video, and I'll link to that as well. That examines this in great detail. This question here right now, and it's a very strange and very contradictory testimony that he gives. I forget his name. Was it? Let's see if I can find it here. Vergalli or something. Let's see. I don't know if you remember that, Ole, his name. Oh, Dario Gabay. That was his name.
Yeah, I know him.
Dario Gabay. Yeah. Very strange.
He later made a film career.
That's right. That's right. He exactly was. Didn't he? Wasn't that actually before though? Wasn't he before the war broke out? He had a career, or was it right after?
Right after.
Right after.
Then,
okay. Yeah.
And then I think along when Steven Spielberg started doing the whole hype around this thing, he got a new career, and he and a handful of other people have been, as far as I know, touring around, giving interviews, giving speeches, and talks about these things. But many of them, I would very much say, when you listen to these, you need to keep an open mind and really listen to what they're saying, because there's a lot of it that does not make sense, It doesn't add up.
Yeah, you're right.
And also, please, this guy, when you see quite a few of these people that testifies are related, they're in the same family. And the stories keep changing. The stories keep changing. The details
over
keep
time.
changing.
Exactly, over time. They said something maybe in the early 80s or something, and then in the late 90s, it's kind of it sounds like it's been exaggerated, and something else has kind of come out of all of this. It's very strange, Yeah,
but it's like there's one of them, for instance. He says that it was so awful. One day, a German guard. He just wanted to see if he could shoot 3 babies with 1 bullet. So they lined them up and shot, and all 3 died with the same bullet. But then later, when he tells the same story, I mean, if you experience something as horrific as that, it would be there in your mind, that, the details would just be there. And then later in a book, he talks about the same thing, but then it's they're in their 20s, the victims,
Right.
Same story, but it's not babies anymore. It's young people. And this is just one. There's so many of these things that doesn't match up.
Now, do you think that some of the people kind of, as time has gone through and it's changed, that they kind of, do you think they believe themselves a little bit, or is it just that they know what they're doing? They know that they're not given the truth here.
Tricky question.
I know.
I think when you're talking about, major mistakes like that, I would say here's somebody who's not telling the truth.
Right.
For some reason, why he's not telling the truth, I cannot say. But when you look at so many false flag operations and so many false testimonies that has been given over the years to start wars and
throwing babies, new. Exactly, taking out babies out of the incubators, throwing them on the floor. Do you remember that? I mean, it was like, that was a little girl, and they used her and they told her what to say, and they staged this whole thing. It's like it's horrible.
No. It was the daughter of the ambassador. She
nonetheless, they used a little girl. It's their own, of course, but that's how horrible that was.
And it's so cold in the way they do it. But, I mean, there's so many things that doesn't make up. And nowadays, also in Auschwitz, outside the so-called gas chambers, there's signs saying not used as a gas chamber.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's not something that we just make up. It's just, it even says disguised as a shower room, never used as a gas chamber. It says that on the sign outside, but that's after millions and millions of people have been there, been walking through, heard this horror story again and again and again being repeated.
Well, we got to remember that too, that it's very much of that emotional programming that's going on here, that when you when you visit some of these sites, I think you're already kind of pre-programmed with what you're supposed to feel. It's almost like the somberness is like incorporated into your emotional makeup at that time, and you know what happened there. It's not. I mean, it's very difficult for someone to like stand there then and try to discount all the things that we've heard and try to look at it from a just completely cold, rational, logical point of view. That's difficult to do. But there are people who have done that, and they have these questions that we're talking about, and they just don't see how this makes sense. And I mean, it's absolutely shocking to come to that realization that, like, my God, if they can lie about something like this and construct it in the way that they have, I mean, it's extraordinary what kind of bubble that they have created for us that we are consequently living within. Completely artificial,
I totally agree. It's like I've been on site on some of these concentration camps. I've been in that emotion, I was totally taken by it, and just like the pure horror and the feeling of evil that was there, or in my mind, it was such a heavy experience. And now I find out more and more about that. Really,
how do you grapple with that emotion of because it becomes an internal conflict? If we've been told something for such a long time, and God knows, we specifically in Europe we get fed this story over and over again. It seems like this is more important than, let's say, some of the mass murders of our own people or some of the battles and wars that we've fought and what have you. But we have people visiting our schools. They're talking about what happened, and usually it's kind of the same crowd, at least in Sweden, I remember, of people that are kind of touring around and telling the same story and whatnot. But it's difficult later on to kind of try to grapple with that emotion of, wait a minute, what's happening here? Why would they lie about this? And it becomes kind of an internal conflict for a lot of people, I think, if they come to this realization.
I think it's very painful, the awakening. This is part of the awakening. And it's like, I thought I knew quite a lot. But over the years, my God, I've just had to unlearn again and again and again.
Yeah,
these things that I was brought up with as being the truth. And then suddenly I find out, wait a second, it doesn't match up. There's something wrong here. And then it just takes you down a rabbit hole. And I think with this one and the history around the man called Adolf Hitler, that is the core element of a conspiracy or cover up of a size that we have never ever seen anything like. Yeah, I mean, 9/11 doesn't even get to the knees of it.
I know.
So it's and for me it really, sometimes I get a headache, because it's like I'm trying to break out of my own mind, trying to comprehend
the magnitude of the lie.
The magnitude. I'm just sitting shaking my head, because it's sort of like, I cannot believe it. It's like, how could we buy into this?
Yeah.
How were they able to pull it off?
I know.
And why?
Yeah.
But this is why I think it's so important to talk about these things, because the same people, the Jewish people, I'm not pointing at the Jewish people as a whole people. I'm talking about a core group that have been behind so much mayhem in the world, and is hiding behind this, as using it as a wall of defense, so that as soon as you even start questioning any of the things they're involved with, they put this sign up, I can't even say the
anti-Semitic.
Yeah. That it doesn't matter that you point at real facts. Doesn't matter.
No.
If you're pointing anything that is Jewish, you're a Jew hater.
Well,
you're a racist.
Think about it. Yeah, exactly. Well, think about it. I mean, now wait a minute. Now you're talking like them Nazis were talking. What maybe you're one of them, huh? It's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. It's like we're looking at something which is a factual portion of history. You can't make a value judgment on top of that. Sure, it could be used in this way or the other, later. But the fact is, this, if it is the monumental lie that that is the possibility here, then this is something that's being used against us and everybody else as a weapon, and that should be examined. Not whether people who look at this or not, what political affiliations they have or don't have. That doesn't apply here.
I think you put it exactly there. It's being used as a weapon against us. It's saying, do not even come close because we're going to hit you with this one. And all the rest of us standing around will just say, my God, how can you even question that? How dare you even look? How dare you talk about that? I mean, 6 million people died, and you dare to even
question it. Yeah.
Question it. But I'm saying it doesn't make sense. There's a massive lie going on here. Somebody is lying on a scale that is incredible. Why are they lying? What is the reason? What is the agenda? Who's behind it? And who benefits? Because that's the one. There's always somebody who's benefiting. And they are the ones that we have to look at.
Would you say that the media is the primary tool which this lie has been perpetuated and disseminated?
I don't know how they pulled this off, but I think it's been going on in stages, because when I look at it, I haven't been able to suss out really why the Soviets came up with these numbers. Why did they do that? Why did they rebuild them to make it look like gas chambers and so on? Why did they do it? And then why, when it was used by the Allies really after the World War, trying to, I would say that what they did was they had just dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, killing a lot of innocent people. I mean, many, incredible what they did there.
Don't forget, Ole, you did have the Yalta conference in February 4th to 11, 1945. This is about, two months before the war officially ended or Germany officially surrendered in May 8th, 1945. So, and you had Roosevelt there, Churchill and Stalin. And, apparently Roosevelt and Stalin was on actually pretty good terms. They even called him Uncle Joe for Joseph Stalin. Yeah. And I mean, there's a real possibility here that something was decided upon as a way to try to pin on Germany as a construction. And it might have been something that the Soviets did, and then the Allied picked up on it, because just as you said, it took a while for the momentum of this whole thing to get started in the way it did, right?
Once again, you're spot on. I was going to bring this up because I think this is exactly how it was done. It was a negotiation. They were splitting up Europe and doing different things among them. And at that conference, I think this came up and they said, okay, if you help me, if you scratch my back, I scratch yours. So
right.
How are we going to do this? We need to take the blame away from us. I mean, Stalin had a lot of things to cover up as well. It wasn't only the Allies or the Americans. We need the world to see us as good guys, and somebody needs to take the fall. Somebody needs to be the patsy. Somebody needs to be the boogeyman. And that's where they pinned it on Germany, who had nothing. I mean, they were totally destroyed. They couldn't defend themselves. They had no way at all to who would even listen to any kind of reason when it came to the Germans. Yeah, so I think this is exactly how it was done. And so they helped each other. And,
it's amazing when you talk about Germany in that way too, that there hasn't been any kind of recognition or, well, I guess an apology issued to Germany for saying, you know what, we're sorry that we accused you of like murdering 1 million people in this camp, but then we had to retract that. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, look at the finances that Germany has, had to fork out to this day ongoing to Israel for this to continue. There's, I think the motive here is clear from many different angles, but there's definitely money involved here too, and a reasoning to try to legitimize, Israel as a recent entity. And these are pretty strong, arguments in themselves of trying to, put the focus somewhere else as opposed to what's happening in the Middle East right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking big money. We're talking 6 million Jews, and 6 million have applied for compensation from Germany. And Germany has, as far as I know, paid out over 100 billion Deutschmarks to Holocaust survivors after the war.
Wow. And
nearly 4 million have received that compensation. But these Holocaust survivors, that is it's like any Jew that was somehow a victim in the war. As far as I've been able to find out, you did not have to be in a camp or in a death camp or labor camp or anything like that. If you were transported from one place to another, or you had to move because of the war, you go in under that umbrella as a Holocaust survivor.
Wow. So what do you think? I mean, obviously, it stands to reason that unless a gas chamber failed miserably at the time of when it was supposed to work, you won't have someone coming out of that situation alive, right? Otherwise, it wasn't a plot to kill them. So how do you approach the idea of testimonies? We've talked about it a little bit already, but I haven't mapped or traced or in any means of all the different voices that are out there that are claiming that they were in a gas chamber per se, as opposed to just being part of a camp. I mean, there's a distinction there. I mean, were you in a camp, or were you actually taken into what you believe was a gas chamber and then they tried to kill you there? I mean, that's a different thing. But do you think, is it the same thing there? You have people who they might have been young at the time. They might be fabrications afterwards. They might have been traumatized. They might have been told even to a certain extent what happened. And over the years, this is kind of just spun out of control and they end up believing themselves. Or we're back to that question again. Is it just one big massive lie? Because I don't know how many people they would have to keep in line if that's the case, but that might not necessarily be what we're talking about here. It might be something which has kind of become a point of agreement, because I know it's a long drawn point here, Ole, but look at the way that this has been projected upon people in the media, and also today, look at how this has become a cultural pillar of Jewish identity, and the fact that if you question that, then it's seen as a personal attack on who they are as their own identity, and that can be a very, very difficult thing to try to come to terms with, I think.
I really don't want to disrespect any survivors or any witnesses. I mean, they've gone through absolute hell, that is for sure. At the same time, very few people, as far as I've been able to find out, have actually seen the process of the gas chambers, from people going in, being killed, being burnt, being buried. Very few witnesses have seen that. Many witnesses have spoken about it, have written books about all the awful things they went through, and during the winters, awful hard work and hard guards, and seeing the smoke come out of the chimneys and the fear. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, people must have been scared out of their wits. Awful. But here it was, as far as I know, it was first after the Second World War that this started coming out. Even the German population was totally shocked about these gas chambers. And when you go to many of these camps, like Sachsenhausen and so on, they were part of a suburb, of the north of Berlin, nice little suburb. And how could the people there not know what was going on? And if they knew, then they would be guilty as well. That is the official story as well, that, you must have known, so you're a Nazi, and you must have wanted the Jews dead as well. So you're just as guilty.
Yeah, and look at the tool, how it's extended, Ole. Even today, that even nations who were like part of fighting Germany has been like accused of not doing enough in this most atrocious event in human history, right? And therefore, they are even partially to blame now. It's being used against the Western world and Europe primarily as a tool, and that's why it's so important to examine it and look in it. And that's been my intrigue with it as well. That if it's a charge made against us, for whatever reason, if it's an accusation, then my primary driving interest in this has been, okay, I want to try to understand what really happened. Are the accusations true? Does it apply to, let's say, me today? Or whatever? Because you have to understand what it is that we're talking about if you are to understand the accusations that's being made against you, and it's tremendously important to look at it for that reason. And I've said this before, but even an insurance claim, for example, where money is involved in a scenario like this, there are agents put in place to legitimize or try to examine what happened, so that to make sure that the insurance claim is legit, and they even re-examine the evidence for it to make sure that it's not on a contractual basis consistence of fraud here, and the same thing technically and reasonably should apply to this situation as well. That if it's money that's being paid out as an admittance of something, then they those who are paying the money have to have a right to look at the evidence that's presented against them. Correct?
Totally correct. And I mean, here we're talking about Germany that have had to pay more than 100 billion with a B, Deutschmark. I mean, that is an incredible amount.
Yeah.
And also we have witnesses, survivors from these places that have been given a monthly payment from here. And I can totally understand that many have, maybe if there were doubts and so on, maybe they have chosen not to speak out because of the compensation they were being given to them and their families and so on after the war. Yeah. And it's still going on. But the weird thing is that the place that you can be jailed for criticizing or even question this official story is not Israel, it's Germany.
Mm-hmm, of course.
And this is where I think we have to look at networks like the Bilderberg Group and the whole New World Order, the structure behind the New World Order and so on. That is where it all makes sense and comes together. That it's their agenda, this small elite group that are pushing forward, trying to get this world into a one world fascist state where they can totally control us. And they're using this whole Jewish horror story to like a wall around them against anyone that will criticize them. So that I know that that even if you start criticizing things around 9/11, you can be called like, well, it's because you hate Jews that you think that the building fell down. It's like,
sure,
what? I'm talking about a building that fell down. I'm not talking about anything with Jews at all. But then they hit you with that. And there's so many interviews, TV interviews and so on in news studios where they get a guest in that has some kind of an opinion about these things, and they just hammer him with these things. He doesn't even get a chance to start presenting facts like that. They just hit him with these things.
Yeah, this is a Zionist conspiracy, and Freemasonry and Jews are involved, and therefore this is illegitimate. Yep, absolutely. I've seen it many times.
Yeah, so have I.
Yeah. So this is done not only to delegitimize questioning. I think you wrote back to me when I said, because as I said, because we touched on this area just briefly last time when we spoke about Paris, and then after the show I asked you, what would you want to talk about that, or what you found concerning this particular event we're talking about now? And then you wrote back to me a while back later, and you said, yes, I want to talk about it because I think it's a way for them to basically make rational thinking illegal. And I found that really a really good reply, basically meaning that we're no longer entitled to using our minds in this way. And this is a horrible attack on self-censorship. And it's not only for this subject alone. I think this subject is at the peak of the pyramid of guilt and shame and self-censorship, if you will. But it also means that if this is beginning now, this might extend to any other area at any other point where people are deemed to be either offended by something like this, or they are emotionally hurt or whatever. And that's a really slippery and dangerous slope towards censorship that is going to make this place a whole lot worse than it is today.
Yep, I totally agree. And I, after the Charlie Hebdo thing in Paris, I was shocked when I saw an interview on French TV where there was one woman saying, she was in the education system, I think, and she was saying, well, now we just have to find out who did not come out in the street and take part of this silent minute for the victims, because then we have to track them down and then re-educate them. I thought,
yeah, there you go.
Is that? And this is exactly the mentality we're talking about. Instead of looking at Charlie Hebdo, seeing, hang on, there's something going very, very strange. I mean, I've spent a whole program with you taking it apart, showing that it actually didn't happen the way we were told. So, but here, just by you being part of the French population, not taking part of a silent minute, that just shows you need to be adjusted. You need to be taken care of by society. And, it is a dangerous, dangerous road, because then we're talking real fascism, real dictatorship. And I just want to point out also, once again, it's not the Jewish population, it's not Israel as a country, but the structure behind it, where Israel is part of it, of this very dark agenda, I would say. When Netanyahu came to the States some years ago, I think it was in the Congress, there were 29 standing ovations.
I saw
in the American Senate or Congress.
Yeah, it's amazing.
29.
Yeah, it's a foreign entity, foreign chief there, running Congress. Well, we know about AIPAC, and I mean these are not fabrications. These are not theories of conspiracies. These are actually happening. I mean, there is also the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Another hugely influential organization that many don't know about. And you folks listening, we did a interview with Jeff Gates that you can listen to for much more on this. We'll link that up. But there are a number of other organizations that are basically clinging American foreign policy right in line with Israeli policy as well. I mean, that's not a secret. Everyone in the States know that now, or if they're in politics anyway.
Yeah, the thing is that if you think that Israel is just a small little country in the Middle East, think again, because it really is so much more, or at least the structure behind it. And it's involved in so much mayhem. And this is also when you look at 9/11 or many of these assassinations and false flags, and I don't know what, you find the Mossad is involved together with the CIA and the MI6, and it's the same. And we need to expose it with the truth.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you mentioned something, of course, about the horrible conditions in the work camps. And I wanted to bring something up that also contradicts that in certain instances, because there are other strange things that we're not being told about that's being kept out. And few of those things, as others pointed out that I've seen in videos and whatnot, is that they, for example, had a swimming pool in the camps. They had theaters.
Auschwitz.
They had movies playing. They had their own currency. They could buy certain things. And I mean, these are things that are omitted out of the history for a very specific reason, I believe.
It is, and it's like the more you listen to witnesses, you will see that the horror stories we hear are very often handpicked, I would say, almost out of hundreds of interviews. They handpick. Of course, they do that when they do documentaries and so on. They handpick the ones that will fit in best to whatever it is they want to present. But just like you say, the British had a soccer team, in Auschwitz. There was a swimming pool. It's still, they say nowadays, even though it's very obvious it's a swimming pool. I mean, there's the stairs going down into, it's a nice rectangular swimming pool, and they even had polo games on Sundays in there. But now it's said that this was a water deposit used by the fire brigade.
Oh, really?
But that they changed the sign now, and also it's blanked out on Google Map. It's just a rectangle. If you go down on Auschwitz, they just put a dark rectangle over it. But it was actually a swimming pool. How does that match up with these horror stories? How does it match up with these different stories? There's many people telling stories about these football games and rugby games and polo games. There were theater. They said there were orchestras. They said that the orchestras was there, to invite foreign journalists and so on, to show that no, we're not killing Jews here. We're doing it easily. But many of these musicians were really being taken care of very well, and then afterwards, after the war, when the whole Hollywood thing started, like with this George Stevens and so on, he was the director of the Anne Frank Diary, among one of them. And then you have around Steven Spielberg, who is Jewish himself. There is a lot of things that has come out there that is just not right. Schindler's List, based on not a true story, even though it's portrayed as a true story. It, as far as I've been able to find out, this character did not exist at all. And there are also documentaries where there's one where he interviews a black soldier that was part of liberating Dachau, I think it was. But the thing is, when you check out this soldier that is giving testimonies about a lot of different things, about the whole, how they liberated the camps and so on.
It's a
he
lie.
wasn't there.
Yeah.
His unit was like 270 kilometers north of that. At that time, he was not there.
There was segregation still in the military at that point, and that's one of the reasons.
Exactly, he was not allowed there.
They were divided, and that's why it's impossible for this to have occurred. And it's still in, I think, one of the Spielberg documentaries on the show around all this, and they've still not retracted this, although it's been proven that it was a fraud. They made it up. They made the whole story up. And when you look at that, when you see that, and the way they kind of, in the way that they portrayed it, and the way with the emotion behind it and emphasis, and when you realize that that's fake, again, this is one of the videos I'll link to so you can look at this for yourselves. You realize that, like, my God, this is it's a wickedness in the way that they're manipulating people's emotions. When this dawns on you that it's a lie, you're like, my God, they're not playing fair here, are they?
Because just like you said before, is the witness, is he aware of, is he lying, or is it just his memory that is playing games with him or something? But with this guy, and there's several other where it's proven they were not there. They could not have been there. So then we're talking about straight lies. These are such lies, and the person or the producer behind such an important documentary should have checked his sources big time if this was real.
Yeah.
And they have not. So I would say for sure that the producer behind this thing you have to really, really question what these people are up to. And in this case, it's Steven Spielberg. And there's quite a lot around this whole Steven Spielberg. And also, I mean, my God, when it's just like when you look around the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize and so on, the people they give that to,
right,
like Henry Kissinger and Obama, ridiculous, for things to come. It's just like, please wake up.
Scandinavia has made a shame of themselves by giving it to certain people, God.
Yeah, but it's the staged event to give people credibility, so that it's okay for them to just hammer the rest of the world, because they were given the Nobel Peace Prize. But here, back to Hollywood, please see the Jewish interest behind Hollywood, how strong they are there, and then see the amount of awards that have been given as soon as you come into this area around the Holocaust. I mean, my God, they have thrown Academy Awards on whatever film that has been produced in this area. And I would say insider trading, again, part of the whole propaganda being pumped out there. And it's so, I bought into it as well for a while. So it's
Easy
so
to do.
easy
Yeah.
to do it if you don't start really looking into the facts for yourself.
Well, I mean, you can talk about that for a little bit, maybe that it's painful and it's difficult and it's unbelievable. That's what it is, because it's part of the makeup of our society. I mean, I've seen people, go visit the monuments. You'll see that it's real, kind of thing, because it's like it's so established that for you to question this is for you to question the very existence, or even it's like you're insane, not us, kind of thing. And it's a huge disconnect there, and that's also one of the reasons I think potentially, Ole, that many people in the alternative media are, which is kind of interesting because you think they have an open mind and things like that, but they have very difficult so-called truth seekers to go to this place and to this point and see and just examine the evidence that exists for this, because I think somehow it makes them associate now they believe that if you look at that, you must be a Nazi, first of all, right? And they don't go then to what an actual National Socialist was like in Germany at the time. They go to the Hollywood version of what a Nazi is like. They go to The Believer or American History X or any of these kinds of things to kind of paint you with a broad brush, kind of stereotypical Hollywood Nazi, and then they think that's who you are now because just you're questioning this, and that's not true. That's not at all what this is about. I think there's so many misconceptions about what is going on here that we don't really know. We don't really have all the answers about what really happened and what the motives were for why this response from Germany occurred in the way that it did, and what actually went down. We've been lied to for such a long time on so many counts that it's impossible for us to almost get to real story. There's tons of fabrications and there's tons of speculations also. Sure, there might be some people that have gotten fairly close to it, but nonetheless, my point is, it's just you can't you have to drop the views of what you think is going on here in order to be able to even approach some sensibility and a balanced view of what actually happened. What do you have to say about this?
I totally agree. Once again, I've, like I said before, it's for myself personally, it's really been a painful experience because I've been standing looking at these monuments. I've been standing there grieving the victims. I've been standing there. My granddad was in jail for helping smuggling Jews to Sweden. My dad was in the resistance movement in Denmark. He had friends that was killed under the Nazi occupation. I grew up with all of these stories. And here, I've also known several people who were in these concentration camps that I grew up with as a child. I used to hear their stories, they came and visited my family. And so I grew up with all this. And now here I am just having to say, oh my God, they were being duped as well. Even they were on location, but still not understanding what was going on, And this is the whole thing. When you look at these major conspiracies, they're totally compartmentalized by design, so that very few people know the whole story. And I, for sure, do not know all the answers to this one. Absolutely not. I'm just a beginner scratching on the surface. But I think I'm here because I think it's so important to stand up for the truth with an open mind and be willing to take it wherever it will lead you. Just follow it fearlessly.
I agree. Yeah.
Because I cannot accept that this dialogue between you and me should be something that we could be put in jail for. That is not acceptable in my world. Yeah. Absolutely not.
Yep, I agree.
And until they put me in jail for speaking like this, I will continue, because I really think that it's our duty. The truth is our duty. It is up to us to find out what's been going on. And a lot of people that are not so awake, if I dare say like that, they are doing other stuff. It's our duty, the ones of us that are here on the edge looking at these things, we have to push forward and keep exposing this.
Yeah.
Big time.
You're right. I agree with you. And also look at some of the other people that have, in past years, early, 80s or late 80s or whatever, there are people who have, just as you said in the beginning of the show, they haven't been violent people. They haven't been, as far as I can tell, wicked or evil or have a bad intent or anything like that. But, from Ernst Zundel, for example, in Canada, who was behind there's a very interesting film that was made about this. I'll link to that too. It's called The Great Zundel Trial, which is the closest that the world has ever gotten to a kind of a trial on this issue. And it was, was Doug Christie, one of the lawyers. There's even a German lawyer, Sylvia Stolz, she was recently jailed, by the way, for defending him. And it's like he's just asking questions about it. Look at the careers of some of the other people, from Germar Rudolph to Fred Leuchter and these people. And they've just simply been looking into it, and they've had their careers utterly destroyed just because they've dared to ask questions that other people haven't dared to ask,
It's so wrong. It is so, and that's why I said I've been a little nervous before this interview, because I have no idea what it's going to do to me or you or whatever. Doesn't matter. It just makes it even more important. And if you look at that lawyer, that woman, my God, it's a beautiful woman, so strong, so pure, so clean in her intent. And I mean, if we were talking, like, the official story would be that a person like that would be somebody standing up screaming hatefully, kill them, hang them, burn them, that type of attitude. But when the people we're talking about have a very, very open, very fearless approach to this, and I would say I applaud them.
Yeah.
I applaud people like that, whatever area they go into. If it's the truth they're looking for and they do it in that way, I applaud them.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable. Sometimes when you read about the people, from other more official sources, shall we say, about some of these people, you'd think that they would be the most awful, wicked, with swastikas tattooed on them, shaved heads going and doing their arm movement. It's like, and then you actually listen to what they have to say or how they present themselves or what they say. Obviously, that's the most important thing here. But nonetheless, it's so obvious that it's all about character assassination. It's about destroying their reputation or who they are, or that these are evil and wicked people who dare to look at this, and that we should be, it's our moral right to throw them in jail for what they're doing. It's just, it's so absurd,
This is the thing. You always get hit with this 6 million. As soon as that's my experience, at least. As soon as I start talking critically or open-mindedly about these things, I get hit with these 6 million. How can you deny that 6 million died? That is a fact. That is a fact. Well, I beg to differ. Because officially it's not 6 million anymore. We're down to very, very, very few compared to that. I mean, every single one that died under these awful circumstances, awful. But I'm at a point where I don't think a single person was gassed at all. I do not think that. There was a lot of people that died, but they died from typhus and starvation and horrible circumstances in these were working camps and so on, labor camps. But when you look at the evidence, they don't match up. These gas chambers did not function. They were not efficient enough to kill anyone. And the gas used would not kill you either. It's sort of like it does not match up.
Yeah, do you want to say something about David Cole, for example, who visited here, and he talked with František Pieper, I think his name was, the head of the Auschwitz museum, and he managed to get some pretty interesting things out of that film he did there.
I think people like David Cole we really have to salute them and thank them, because they were, at least in my opinion, some of the first ones who started to dig into this area. David Cole is a Jewish man himself, and what he did, he went to Auschwitz. I think, I'm not sure he went other places, but at least there, and really just as a Jew got a possibility to sort of ask from the inside, so that he spoke to the owner of the museums, the director of the museum, he spoke to the guides and so on. And because he was Jewish, they did not see him as sort of like a threat from the outside, but they spoke quite openly. And he managed to just get them to tell the truth about a lot of these things. But even the guides at these places don't know the real truth either. They're just forwarding the story that they have been told, and from people that have been informed about. It's the same, just repeating the same information, but what is called facts turns out to be lies.
That's how it goes, and it continues, and it's recycled, and then But if there is no problem here, I don't see the reasoning why we couldn't examine the claims that are made here and just reasonably approach the subject. But it's a very interesting case. But as I've said many times, it's almost like when there is a kind of this wasn't a non-event. This was a massive world war, where, interestingly enough, by the way, people probably can say, everyone can repeat how many Jews have died, but even if you ask people in France, they can't remember how many French people died, or how many British people died, or even how many Germans died, or even how many Danish people died. It's like this story only goes one way, and there only was one victim here, despite that this is being a civil war on European soil, where more Europeans have been murdered in these battles than anyone else. But nonetheless, the point I wanted to get to was that, usually when there is a non-event, so to speak, it's lifted up in the media, it's promoted, it's turned into this whole thing. And when there is a non-issue, usually it's a cover-up, or then the guilt goes in the wrong direction. And speaking to that, for example, one of the things that people don't know about is the death camps that existed towards the German troops, the Eisenhower's, the Rhine Meadows camps, for example, the death camps. Yeah. I mean, why is this not talked about? This is absolute horror. It's atrocity. But now the picture begins to balance itself a little bit now when you look at this. That, okay, the Allies weren't all good. It just didn't go one way. It's almost like, Ole, that this is it's almost like this is the creation of a kind of a new religion, almost, where one side is the devil and Satan, the incarnate of evil in the world. And for the justification to exist on the opposite side of that, you need this dichotomy in place so that you can, play the world that they're playing it right now. I don't know how to explain it, but what's your thoughts?
It's the same thing they do with false flags. You need a patsy, you need a boogeyman, you need somebody to blame. And as far as I know, at the Nuremberg trial, or before the Nuremberg trial, they made it so that only Germans and Germany could be tried for war crimes, and were the only country that was allowed to be tried for. England wasn't, the States wasn't. And I mean, if you look at it, dropping the bomb over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, oh my God, compared, and the cowardness behind it is like,
yeah, I know.
Oh, and then they say that was the thing that stopped the Second World War. Okay, but
they had largely given up. They had given up at that point, pretty much. This was an experiment. It was a live experiment.
Exactly. It was, and with the same mentality that we were talking about before. I don't get it. How can you do such a thing? But the people behind that are also the ones who have been part of writing history afterwards, painting Germany black.
Yep, I know. It's a major blame game that has been going on. Look at Hollywood. I can't tell you how many times I just, we watch media, we monitor what goes on the TV, because unfortunately, as we know, this is what largely shapes people's minds today. I'm not talking about the people in the alternative necessarily, although interesting enough, a lot of people repeat some of the sentimental morals that comes through us from there too. But nonetheless, I can't tell you how many times, like, Germany and Germans specifically, not Nazis per se, but now the guilt is on Germans now, but they show them as cold, or like that, they're not warm people. They don't have any humor. And it's like, I wonder, it's like, how long is this going to cling on? How's this going to cling on to people who are born today in Germany, who have to fork out money, be part of paying for this stuff, who obviously had nothing whatsoever to do with what went on 2 generations ago? I mean, how long is it going to continue, right?
It's time to break the spell. I mean, this is also why I'm doing this, because so many innocent people are suffering from this that has absolutely nothing to do with it. It's time to break this. I don't know what to call it, but it is almost like a spell that has been put on the world.
Well, that's what Nick Kellerström mentioned it. Interestingly enough, we did a program with him a while back. He released a new book called "Breaking the Spell," where he questions this. I don't know if you heard that, but that's obviously pertinent to this. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's time to break out. Break out of this fog that we've been gassed with.
What pun intended? What can you say about what do you know rather about the confessions of someone like Rudolf Höss, for example, who and the Nuremberg trials and all this? What do you make of that?
The thing is, it's, as far as I know, once again, I'm not an expert, but I know quite a lot about these things. It's like it's the first time where the one that has lost the war has ever been tried in a thing like this, in a war tribune like this, and also executed by hanging and so on, like real criminals. And when you look at the one that took over after Hitler, I mean, he was a general, but had absolutely no say in the whole thing. So I think when you look at the Nuremberg trial, we're back to the illusion of justice, the illusion of getting the bad guy. And here they were trying people that many of them had absolutely nothing to do with the so-called death camps or the third world, the whole agenda and these, but they needed people to take the fall. Once again, it's the patsy. It's the patsy. Blame them, and then kill them to shut them up. So yeah. I see the Nuremberg trial as a big
kangaroo court kind of thing.
Totally. And I can't remember who was the judges in this court, but there's some very strange things around them as well. Some very shady figures there.
I wanted to ask you about some other things, see if you knew about this. We had a lady with us a while back, author who's produced a lot of works on this, trying to look into the issue to get to some kind of bearing on what has been happening during the Second World War, before and after and whatnot. Her name is Veronica Clark, and she wrote, I've written a couple of books on this issue alone, but she's written many different books, but on actually how there was a lot of different people from different areas in the world that joined to fight with the Germans.
Yeah.
From many other parts of the world. There was even factions within the SS that were, I guess for the lack of a better term, multicultural.
Yeah.
Indians, black people. There was all kinds of, and it's so bizarre when you think about this, because you've heard all the time that it was all about, racial purity and, they hated everyone else and all these kinds of issues. But what seemed to have been the case here at the time, if we kind of take away the facade and the propaganda, is that there were people coming together from different parts of the world, and obviously Germany led the charge here, to try to fight an enemy, which in this case was world communism, were people who are convinced that this was, the evil of the world at the time, and considering what was found out about, how many people were mass murdered in Russia and with Ukraine and all these things, I understand them. I understand that they had this incentive, but it presents a different image, which is very contradictory to what we've heard. Have you looked into this at all, Ole?
Yeah, God, I know one of them. I knew one of them. He was a Danish guy who, as a very young man, joined up with the German troops going into the Soviet Union, and he was a freedom fighter. he saw it, what he was doing his absolute best to defend what he believed in. And he was a very, very strong character, believing in the good of humankind. And I've always been confused about, and I even asked him, he's dead now, but I asked him, how could you join the German troops? How could you?
Right.
But at that time, he was standing up for what he believed was right. And now the more that comes out behind this veil of shadows that is covering this whole thing, the more I can see his point of view, and I start to see more and more that he was what he believed in was actually what was happening as well.
Yeah. A response was, I've tried to communicate that with other people as well, that I think that, again, just because you look at this, you can't assume that it means that you're propagating the view, the image, the fabrication of what we've been told that these people were all about. It's about trying to understand that they had their reasons at the time to mount this. It was a horrible conflict. I never wished that it happened. It has largely destroyed Europe. It's absolutely, it brings me to tears every time I think about what happened and why. But I just also have to say that I'm seeing the reasoning why they felt that they had to mount the opposition to what they saw was a major problem at that time in the world. I think their response, especially after you learn what happened after the First World War, the Balfour Declaration, the Versailles Treaty, all these things that occurred at the time, the Versailles Treaty, the Balfour was obviously later, but how they try to pin everything on Germany, it's going to be divided up by the rest of the European nations. The country was brought to utter ruin. There was tremendous just horror in the country, in Berlin, and debauchery, and people had to sell themselves. There was monetary crisis and things, and out of that misery, if you will, came something which was very, very understandably also angry in response, but also something that tried to kind of regain back what was lost at that time. But I think the main thing to keep in mind here is that they, considering the threat that they faced at the time, I think that their response was appropriate. And I'm not talking about the response which you might have heard on the news or in a movie somewhere, but I'm talking about the real response, the real thing that was going on behind the surface of all those things we're never being told about. Again, I don't have far from all the answers on this, but I've gone far enough to realize that there are tremendous lies here that have been put up in front of us for us not to see what all this whole thing was about. So it's I don't know. It's just important to keep these things in mind, that it's not about propagating a system which you believe that this represented, this movement. It's something completely different. I think we're so far removed from what the truth is that it's just very difficult for us to see what it was all about, really, to be honest.
I think there's a documentary called The Greatest Story Never Told. I believe you have had the filmmaker on your show and so on.
Yes.
I think that one is it's a very good way of starting to opening up your mind to. I'm not saying that one is 100% true. Sometimes I feel he's going a little bit over the edge to the other side. Mm-hmm. Because everything around Hitler is so black. So maybe he's trying to make it a little more light. That I don't know. But what I'm saying is that at least instead of we see all these films where Hitler stands shouting, but you never hear what he's saying. You're never allowed to hear his words.
Of course not.
You're not allowed to read his words in the book Mein Kampf and so on. Once again, I'm not a Nazi. I don't even kill a fly. I step over ants. I'm a Raja Yoga teacher. It's like
you want to get to the truth. That's what the root of this is, Ole. Right? You want to get to the truth. Yeah,
that's it. And it's only when you start looking from a different angle when things start making sense. I've always been very confused. Why did Hitler stop his troops at Dunkirk, where he had the possibility to just totally wipe them out? No, they said that he had a brain meltdown, and he let everyone out. And then they said, okay, now let's go in there.
Yeah.
How can you explain that he made at least some 22 peace offerings in the beginning of the war with England, and they were turned down, all of them?
Oh, yeah. France, yeah. There was a letter, sorry to interrupt, but this is just so interesting. There's so many things around this, but the letter that King George wrote, or his speech rather, not his letter, the speech that he wrote was several days before the Britain declared war on Germany, but everything was already planned. Everything was already laid out. They knew what the move was, what they were going to do. I mean, goes back to the Gleiwitz, what is that called again? The Gleiwitz, event or whatever, and with Poland and what really happened there as well. And it's a very, very interesting story because everything kind of spins out of control after that point. But it's fascinating. I mean, we should be excited to try to learn the truth about what really happened at this point. It's not about, flinging evil around or something like that. It's a dedication to the truth for the sake that truth matters, and truth should be honored wherever it leads.
I totally agree. And also, it's like, it's only when you start digging into these things, like I've spent so many years looking into the JFK assassination and the whole thing around, and the war machine that took over when they killed him, and have stayed in power ever since, I would say, in the States. Where one of the main ingredients to start with was the Dulles brothers. Alan Dulles, who was part of he was the director of the CIA for a while. He was part of the assassination. He was part of the Warren Commission and covering the whole thing up. But it was the Dulles brothers that was the architects of the Versailles Treaty that totally knocked Germany to its knees. And then,
oh really? I didn't know that. Yeah.
And then they were part of Operation Paperclip, getting all of the scientists out and all of these. And you got the Bush family with Prescott Bush. That was he was as far as I know, the one that faked the Zimmerman telegram that got the U.S. into the First World War, and then part of financing Hitler in the Second World War. These players are in the background, financing both sides in conflicts, trying to play them out against each other. And these are the things, the puppet makers, the puppet masters, these are the forces we need to really look at as well. And it's only when you start seeing the bigger picture that you will start to get a feeling for what actually happened. And I think Germany, it's time for us to let their guilt feeling go. They have been suffering for such a long time for something that they have been innocent to. And it's time for the rest of us to take responsibility for being blind for such a long time, for having letting this continue because we've been totally asleep, but also to give world history another chance to redeem itself, to show what actually happened. So that we can understand how these things are built up by design very often to destroy. And so the more we understand how this mechanism works, then we can stop it from repeating itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you, Ole, for not only your courage and humanity that you express towards towards Germans and Germany in the extension, and the way that you have chosen to just examine the issue and going in that direction to try to find some kind of sensibility within it and to recognize and see how it is being used today as a tool. And I believe you're absolutely correct that it's a kind of a template that has been used many times. And I think that if we don't get smart to that, and if we don't, to a certain extent, come to terms with these kinds of issues, and so that we can understand them, they definitely are going to happen again, and they're going to be used against us once again. And the furthest thing, the thing I'd like to see least in the world, obviously at this stage, is another war in Europe somewhere or anywhere else for that matter. But I mean, look at even like how Russia and Ukraine are being played against each other now and things like that. These are elements that are very closely related, in my opinion, to what happened in the 30s, and we got to be careful about that, and and who's playing us, who's feeding us with the information about what we should think about a people,
I can only agree.
Is there anything else, Ole, that you'd like to talk about? We've gone for a little bit over 2 hours. It's been a very, very good discussion. Very, very interesting. Very, I think, difficult for some people. Others will already be completely familiar with a lot of this material and what have you. But everyone is at a different stage in where they're at and the different interests that they have in looking into things. So I think we've been able to offer something for people on many different levels here today. But is there anything else that you feel that you want to either explain or talk about, or something that's going to be, let's say, something that might be used against you just for you daring to speak about these things, or people who think you're crazy for talking about this? I don't know. Anything that's on your heart that you'd like to give out, please let us know.
I would say thank you for letting me have the opportunity to step forward together with you in this. I know so many people, brave people, have done it before me, so it's nothing really new. But in my world, it's a big step forward. But what I would like is, if it's okay with you, to finish with a prayer. It's I'm not a religious person, but I'm a Raja Yoga teacher. It's the science of the mind. It's a 5,000-year-old science. And I have this beautiful teacher. Her name is Nelani Chelaram, and she has this prayer that I absolutely love, and it goes like this: May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May everyone, and especially the ones who hurt us, be filled with peace and joy, love and light. Victory to that light. We all need to heal, the so-called bad guys, us, all of us need to heal. So let's help each other. And I think one of the absolute best tools to do that is the truth. How scary or awful it might look, it's still the way to go.
I agree. Now, give us your website, Ole, once again, and tell us again about it was a few years ago or a couple of years ago, we talked about the book, obviously, about Olof Palme and some of the other things. You have some writings out there, and you do speaking engagements and things like that. But give us the details of where people can find your work.
My website is lightonconspiracies.com. lightonconspiracies.com. Very handpicked name, because that is exactly what I try to stand for, to put light in the dark corners. And the book you're mentioning is a book about the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme. But it goes, which is an absolute mind-blowing conspiracy assassination. I've done, together with you, Henrik, I think we did 9 hours in total around that assassination. And so the book is about the Palme assassination, but with all the connections going into, even back to the JFK assassination, into the Iran-Contras, the sinking of MS Estonia, the Freemasonry networks, the Bilderberg groups. I mean, all of it. It's a massive book. It's 1,100 pages almost. Coup d'etat in slow motion. And, I can only say I don't work for anyone. I'm not part of an organization. I'm not politically involved. I'm just me. And if somebody would like to support what I'm trying to do, I've spent 30 years doing this. I'm going to continue until I stop breathing. Please sign up for my newsletter, buy my book. Donations are greatly appreciated. Or... that's it. Anywhere I can make a difference, please count me in, And I'm in the process of preparing different international tours. What I'm going to do is especially try and go to the places where they carried out different atrocities or false flag operations and so on, and then on site give talks or give guided tours around it to expose what actually happened instead of the official stories that we're being pumped with. So anyone who would like to see me wherever you live in the world, please contact me, info@lightonconspiracies.com. Wherever it is I can make a difference, if it's to go and speak to military people, to gangs, to prisoners, to members of the elite, I'm most happy to do it. Just make it possible for me financially. I'll go there. I'll do my absolute utmost. Frontline up there, not a problem. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much, Henrik. And I think Red Eyes is really an amazing forum or platform for truth seekers to join and gather. And thank you so much for making it possible.
Well, you bet. Thank you. We couldn't do it without people like yourself. So thank you for all the work you're doing, and of course for staying brave and going into territories and letting the answers lead where they may, as they say. The website again here, lightonconspiracies.com, and of course we'll touch base with Ole again in the future. But for now, we say thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon, Ole.
Thank you, Henrik.
That ends our program for today. We hope you have some new things to think about and to consider, and to further look into and research for yourself. You can see our relevant links for a good start in that direction. Remember that the important thing here is that we encourage the good Western tradition of questioning, debating, arguing, and examining. Free speech, freedom of opinion, and freedom of expression. That is what is key here. Well, tune in again. You can hear us 3 times a week as we address some of the most important and interesting topics. At least if you ask us. We're talking about all the elephants in our space that no one talks about, and the emperor's new clothes, if you will. We have much more coming. We have Colin Ross, Thomas Rousel, Greg Johnson, Mark Hackard, Stephen McNallen, Veronica Clark, and many more. For now, we say thank you for listening. Please take care of yourself, your family, your loved ones, and your folk, and we'll speak more soon.